It's Create Day, my friends. Welcome back to another video. Today I want to share with you how I transformed an ordinary glass bottle and hardcover book into some beautiful spring decor. Let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is paint my book. I'm using Folk Art's Home Decor chalk paint in the color Cottage White for this. It will take 2 coats to get the coverage that I need, and I am painting the entire cover of this book, front, back, and the spine. When that is dried, I can open this up and paint where that cover meets the inside of the front and back. It's just a little strip that goes around that needs to be covered up because it's black, just like the cover of my book. I just use a small paintbrush for this to paint over just that black area. I have this decoupage rice paper that I got from Milton's daughter. It's miltonsdaughter.com, and I'm going to be using the bird section of this. These rice papers are really nice. They're beautiful, but they're also very easy to work with. To separate the one that I want from the other half, I started out with my water pen, but it wasn't working. It was not coming out, and then it came out all at once all over the place. So I just switched out over to a paintbrush, dipping it in water so that I can tear this separate from that other piece. And then I'm going to go around all the edges, tearing off the white edging around this paper. I'm using my matte Mod Podge for this. You can use whatever type of sealer that you like and that works for you. I like to work in sections. I start at the top, put that on about 1/3 of the way down, maybe a little less than that. Smooth it out. I have a little scraper I like to use, and also a little bit of plastic wrap, like saran wrap, to help smooth out any air bubbles and wrinkles. To me, I really like working with this rice paper. It's not as fragile as napkins or tissue paper, and I am very happy with the results I get. Now I'm going to go ahead and seal this with my Mod Podge, just working this along the center and out to the edges, making sure everything's covered. I want some background texture on this piece, so I'm using this modeling paste that I picked up from Hobby Lobby, taking a palette knife and my brick stencil, and I'm not completely covering, I gotta figure out how to say this. I want the bricks to look kind of not complete, like there's just bricks here and there, and there's half bricks, and they're just really rustic looking and not having like a full pattern. I guess that's what I should say. I don't want like a full pattern going completely into the background of this. I just want it kind of randomly placed here and there, with the exception of random being that I do want them all going the same direction. And anytime I get a little extra on there that I don't want, you can just wipe it off with a baby wipe. So I just work my way down this book and add this background texture on there. I did this next step off camera, so I just wanted to reenact here. It's 80 grit sandpaper that I have, and I just lightly sanded over those bricks. You can get little peaks that stand up, and I wanted to just smooth that out a little bit better. And now I'm going to seal it with my Select Seal Matte Sealer. I'm doing this because I'm going to be adding other layers of things on here, and that modeling paste needed to be sealed. And I also recommend using a hardcover book for this for that reason. I'm going in now with some crackle paste It took me 2 tries to get this to crackle. I put it on way too thin the first time. I'm using a palette knife, and I'm brushing or scraping this on sometimes over the bricks, sometimes just over the middle section there with the rice paper on it. I wanted some random crackling going on over this whole piece, but like I said, I applied it too thin. I was worried about getting it too thick, but it didn't crackle the first time, so I had to do it again. And once that was done crackling and dried, I'm using my Rust-Oleum chalked aged glaze. You can use any glaze that you have. There, it's pretty much the same as the other ones. Brushing this on, letting it get down into all that crackle, which there wasn't a ton of crackle, but that's okay. I didn't want it to overpower everything anyway, so I brush that on and then just start dabbing off any excess with a baby wipe. I will leave links down below in the description box for all of the items that I can find links to, as well as just a product list of what I used in today's video. Now this did give me a nice start of the aged look, but it wasn't enough for me. That was not complete in my eyes. So the next step is to add some paint to make this look the way I want it to. I'm starting off with bark brown and adding a little bit of water to it so that I can dab this on mostly over the bricks, and then I can wipe it back so I don't get full coverage over my bricks. This is a technique that I use a lot. I like layers of paint, so I like to add a little here and then dab off like most of it or at least part of it so that you just get little bits and pieces of it, and that way you can layer your paints and you will still see little bits of all the different colors you use. The next color I'm using is called Stormy Gray. I'll be doing the same thing. I've got it watered down. I'm going to brush this on and then dab it back with the baby wipe. So that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and use my chalk paint in the color French Linen to add some dry brushing to the tops of the bricks, just to add a little bit of highlight so that they don't have total grungy coverage. I want there to be spots almost like as if like if you were doing a painting, how you would consider your light source and there would be highlights. That's kind of what I'm doing with this. Next step is my Dixie Belle's Van Dyke Brown Glaze. I'm adding that over that middle section to help bring out the crackle effect. And now I'm going in with Fusion's mineral paint in the color Parchment, adding a little bit of that to the bricks as well. And I think I actually end up going in with even a little bit of just plain white acrylic paint just to make those bricks have some more highlights to them. Now I have a stencil I want to put on a piece of drop cloth, so I'm using Stays On ink in the color Jet Black and just a little blending brush to stencil this on. I cut this out to wrap around the spine of the book so it would just overhang onto the front and back just a little bit. So I'm not thrilled with the way that that border that I chose, but it's what I had, so whatever. We'll just go with it. Now this is a little stamp that I've used before. I think I used it in my last video. Taping off the parts of the stamp I don't want so that I can ink that up and put that in the middle of that little border that I have stamped onto the drop cloth. So now I can remove that tape and then stamp that down onto my drop cloth. It was a little bit too light the first time, so I did add a second coat of ink, and I taped it off again, added the ink, and then went back down over it to darken it up a little bit. And here's how it turned out. Now this is another strip of drop cloth that I put just to cover that spine underneath the piece that I'm wrapping around it. There was some indented lettering on the spine of the book, and I didn't want that showing through. So I wanted to double up the layer right there on the spine. I'm using Fabri-Tac glue for this. Just, it doesn't need a ton of glue. It's just enough to get that adhered on there well enough that I can place the other one over it and it won't move around on me. So now I'm taking some sandpaper just to kind of rough up those edges, and then I can attach that over the spine on top of the piece of drop cloth strip that I put on there beforehand. Get that centered up and just press it down and let it dry. I'm going to add some age to the book pages, and actually I should have done the next couple of steps before I ever put that little piece of drop cloth onto the spine. It would have just made things a little bit easier, but it turned out okay. I'm brushing this on to the top of those book pages and then wiping back the excess with a baby wipe. I do this step on all 3 sides of the book pages. Once that had dried, I took some sandpaper and just kind of roughed up those edges a little bit. And then I applied some of my Jolie's white wax. I'm going to brush this on and then wipe it back with a cloth. I decided I wanted to add some age to the back of the book as well, so I gave it a coat of the Jolie Clear finishing wax, and now I'm going to apply the black wax over the clear. I let the clear set for a little while, and then I went in with the black wax, brushing that on and wiping it back. And I'm going to go ahead and do this around those edges on the inside where I had applied the white paint that meets up with the paper on the inside of the book covers. So I'll have a finished look all the way around this book. Now I'm going to use my antiquing wax to complete this aged look. I'm brushing this on in the same areas over the back and the edges wherever I put that black wax. brushing it on, wiping it back, and it just helps give this a nice rustic look. I'm going to tack down that drop cloth just with a couple of drops of hot glue to keep it in place so that I can wrap some twine around this and not have it moving around on me. I'm using some jute twine to wrap around kind of in the center of that section of drop cloth that's on the front and back. I think I go around about 4 times and then I tie it off in a knot. I trim off that excess length and then add a little drop of hot glue where that knot is to just keep it in place. I also do a couple of spots on the back. Now I'm going to use my Distress Oxide in the color Vintage Photo around the edge of this number snippet from Tim Holtz. I'm using a little sponge applicator to get this just around those edges, and then I will be gluing that down to the lower right hand side of the book. I have these brads from Hobby Lobby. It's the Paper Studio brand, and this one color I chose is like a kind of a brass finish. I'm cutting off the little legs to those and then tucking the remainder into the center of the brad with my needle nose pliers. And then I can apply these to the areas of that stenciled border that I just wasn't really happy with. I'm using Fabri-Tac glue for this. And it just kind of dresses it up a little bit, adding a little hardware, just makes it look more interesting. And I don't know if you have a problem with your glue oozing out of the tip like I do, but you unscrew the top, press that bottle in, and then when you screw the top back on and release, it will suck that all back down into the bottle where it belongs. So here's how this little book turned out, and I will have more detailed pictures at the end of the video. So now on to our glass bottle. I soaked this to get the label off. I got it good and clean, and now I'm going over it with some rubbing alcohol to make sure it is free of anything that would keep my paint from adhering. It's going to get a coat of my Rust-Oleum flat white spray paint. With that dry, I can apply my chalk paint in the color Cottage White, just like I did with the book. Only I'm going to use a sponge for this. It's like just a round applicator sponge. This way I don't get any brush marks, but this was actually, for the technique I want to use after this, I should have done a coat with the brush and then gone over it with this to remove those brush strokes because there was not enough paint on here for the next process, which was this crackle. I have not had any luck with this crackle yet. Like, it's just, I don't know if it's the crackle or if it's me. Once my paint was dry, I went ahead and applied this according to directions, and it did crackle, but it crackled all the way through to the glass. And only in a couple of spots. So it's like it didn't crackle and then it did that. So I gave it another coat of my Rust-Oleum spray white, the flat white and the spray paint. And now I'm going over with the chalk paint again with a brush this time. And then I will go back over it another time with the little sponge applicator so that I don't have those lines. Now on to making some molds. I'm using IOD's air dry clay for this. This is a mold that I got from Amazon. It's Redesign, called Avian Love. And I would recommend doing this particular one in resin, not clay. I made it work, but it's got a lot of kind of fine pieces in it, like where the branches and some flowers are. They're just, really fiddly, and they break really easy when you're doing, like, because this is kind of a large continuous piece here. So, and I use the cornstarch and everything that you're supposed to do. It was just difficult. Some molds are that way. They just would work better with resin than with clay. So I get that kind of rolled out there. And the challenge was in order to pick this up, that's where you start to run into trouble with it because it wants to fall apart. But anyway, I'm touching up the edges, smoothing them out with just a paintbrush dipped in water. And you can see now, see how it like broke when I picked it up. So I'm working in pieces now. I'm using my Type Bond wood glue, rubbing it over the back so that I can apply this to my bottle. Right away, when I get my pieces glued down, I go in with a wet paintbrush to get any little extra glue out that I can, using my baby wipe as well to get any little glue spots that I manage to get on there with my fingers, because, it's kind of a messy process. I made a few more castings of these little tiny flowers. These are actually part of a branch that's like separate from the original castings that I did. So I just filled in the spots on that mold that I wanted to use, and, did it that way. You don't have to use the entire section of the mold if there's just one little piece on there that you want. And this is another section of that mold that I wanted to use. And so basically what I did was just kind of piece some things together to fill in and create my own design instead of just using the molds as they were. I just took bits and pieces to put it together how I saw fit. So now all my castings are done. They are on there and glued down. And I did have to leave this overnight to dry because it was late. Normally I would go in and paint fairly soon after applying my castings to prevent or at least decrease the cracking and the shrinking. But I didn't have that choice this time. So I am using my chalk paint in the color Cottage White, making sure that I'm getting in around all those little edges where there might be any little gaps to help fill that in. I'm going to use my Turbo Tacky Glue to apply some of this lace that I picked up from Michael's. I'm attaching this to the bottom of the bottle. Now I watered down my tacky glue because it's really thick, and honestly it didn't stick all that great. I mean, it eventually stuck. It just took longer than I expected. So when I put a little strip of this up at the neck of the bottle, I actually used Mod Podge instead. That worked a little bit better for me. So I just am brushing this on and then laying that lace down on top of that. When I get to the back side, I trim off the excess and then add a little more glue and seal that down. And here I'm just trying to expedite the drying process because I was being impatient. So like I said, I used my Mod Podge for the one on the top, and that dried faster, so I was happy with that. I did a top coat of the Mod Podge over the lace, just like you would if you were decoupaging something. I have this silicone leaf mold. This is from Amazon. I will leave the link below if I can find it. And I decided to go ahead and make all three styles of leaves. I'm going to be adding these onto the top of the bottle at the base of the neck. And I'm also going to make some floral castings to add to that as well. So I'm just showing you that I like to put a little water on my mat, dip my finger in it, and smooth out any little rough spots around the edges. So now when I go to apply these, I want to be overlapping, and there's no way for me to know unless I made a whole bunch of these up in advance. I wouldn't know exactly the spacing I need. And because it was clay, I couldn't make them up in that far in advance. I couldn't make them all at once. I made quite a few just so I could figure, like, just guesstimate how the spacing would be. And so I just kind of had to wing it. I started gluing them on there, um, layering and whatnot. But I did have to make some adjustments when you come back to that, when you get around to that last piece and it doesn't quite line up right, then it's like, oh, now I got to kind of move things around. And luckily that glue had not set up to the point that I couldn't still move things around. Now onto the little flower castings. This mold is from Amazon as well. I did make a bunch of these up. I felt like I could probably get to these, getting them glued on before they dried too much. So I went ahead and made up, I don't remember if it was 8 or 9. Um, anyway, that doesn't matter. I made them up so that I could figure out how I was going to lay them out on top of those leaves. Because again, I wanted these to overlap and I had to figure out how I was going to overlap them and how much. Yeah, I think it was 8 flowers. So I'm just going to go ahead and start gluing those on. But again, when I got around to the end, it wasn't quite right and I had to move things over just a little bit. So it was a little bit of a challenge, but in the end, it turned out just fine. So now with those glued in place, it's time to break out the same cottage white chalk paint, add that to our lace and to our new castings. Now that we have everything on this bottle painted, it's time to go in with some Fusion mineral paint. I'm got the color parchment here. I have a moistened sea sponge, and I'm just going to dab this on all over the bottle. This off-white has a gray undertone, which looks really cool up against the white of the cottage white chalk paint. So this is like my first layer of color that I'm putting down onto this piece. By the time I get done with it, it actually has a very natural stone look to it, which I absolutely love. And it helps that there was some texture made by that little sponge applicator that I used in the beginning. So it just looks really cool. But see, you can see the difference. Like it looks like there's like a light gray on there, even though it's just an off-white. So now I'm mixing my chalk paint in the color Cascade with my white acrylic paint so that I can get a much lighter shade of this color. And I'm going to use that moistened sea sponge to dab this on over all of my castings, just adding a little bit of blue to this. I'm keeping this piece very neutral in color, but I did want to bring out a little hint of blue to just give it some color variation and not have it all just the neutral colors. Once that was done, I sealed that with my polyacrylic matte sealer. This will give me a good foundation for my next step. I'm using the same chalked aged glaze that I used on the book, and I'm going to start applying this on the castings, going around the edges first. I don't know if it really matters how you do that, but I started going around the edges, making sure I get all those recessed areas, and then going over the top of the castings, and then I will also pull this down onto the base of the bottle and wiping back the excess with my baby wipe. When I got to the area where the lace was, I added a little bit of water to the glaze so that this would spread really easily into that lace and get down in between all the little openings so that it would also get to the base of the bottle instead of just laying on top of the lace. To make a stopper for the top of my bottle that's removable and not permanent, I'm using this ball knob from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to use my Titebond wood glue to glue it to a small cork that I had in my stash. That way you will be able to put it into the bottle, but still remove it if you wanted to add like a flower or something inside the bottle instead of having the stopper on it. Now back to the bottle after that glaze has dried. I'm using that original cottage white chalk paint to dry brush over the highlighted areas or the raised areas of my castings. And then I'm also using that to go over lightly, just dry brushing over the lace to bring some of the white back. However, it did not look highlighted enough to me. So I ended up breaking out the plain just white acrylic paint and dry brushing over all of that again to bring more of a white tone back out, especially around that lace. When the glue had set on that little topper that I made, I went in with that same chalked aged glaze from Rust-Oleum. I did 2 coats of that over the knob and the cork, and then I broke out my antique gold rub and buff, and using a sponge applicator, I just kind of dabbed it on all over, trying to not leave a definite pattern or anything, just getting some random gold on there. Kind of buff that down a little bit. And then I decided to tone it down just a little bit. It was a little bit too gold, so I toned it down by adding some of my antiquing wax over that. After that, I added some white wax to tone it down a little bit more. I wasn't quite happy with it, so I just rubbed this on with my finger, buffed it back with a cloth, and then when that was dry, I actually sanded this down very lightly with a fine grit sandpaper just to kind of smooth it all out a little better and give it the look that I wanted. Now it's time for some splatters. I'm using that mixture that I made out of the Cascade chalk paint and white acrylic paint, the really light blue color. I've got some of that on my plate. I'm adding some water to it, and using my fan brush, I am just creating little splatters all over the bottle. Next, I use that same Rust-Oleum chalked aged glaze, just slightly watered down. Then I do the same with Fusion's parchment. And lastly, I add my white acrylic paint watered down. I switched out to a different paintbrush because I was getting paint everywhere and I wanted to see if this one would make a difference. So here you can see after I have the splatters on there how this just has that natural stone look to it. I absolutely love it. Next, I need to seal all that goodness in with my Select Seal matte sealer. I need to finish off the bottom of that bottle, so I am using that original cottage white chalk paint, doing 2 coats onto the bottom, and then when that is dry, I will do 2 coats of the polyacrylic matte sealer. Now I'm taking that antique gold rub and buff and very lightly just touching over the raised areas on the castings, trying to use a really light hand here. I don't want to overwhelm this with a lot of gold. I just want some highlights. I'm adding some jute twine to the top part of that bottle where all the little ridges are where the cap would screw on, and I want all of that completely covered up with this twine. So I'm going to just take my time, wrap this around, adding hot glue where I need it. The hardest part where you need the hot glue the most is when you come up over the raised edge because it does not want to stick there. It wants to like go either up or down into the recessed areas. And I wrap this all the way around up to the very top as close as I can get to that top lip so I can cover it all without it hanging over and causing my stopper to not fit in there properly. Once I get that all glued down the way I want to, I trim off the end and just finish gluing down that little tiny piece that's left, and then I will burn off the fuzzies with a lighter. For the last step, I wrap some more of that jute twine around the bottom of the bottle, more haphazardly than I did at the top, keeping it casual. I'm going to finish that off with a little drop of hot glue, burn off the fuzzies, then I can add that finished stopper into place, and this bottle is done. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I really appreciate each and every one of you. You are all so kind and loving. If you are new to my channel, I hope you find my content useful and will consider subscribing. But more importantly, I hope I've inspired all of you to go create something. See you next time.